Everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for June 2019. This is our second DM Roundtable. I believe the first one I labeled as April, even though it was for May. So if you're wondering where the May Roundtable is, that was last month's. This month is, in fact, June. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons, excuse me, at every level of patreon.com/RogueWatson. You don't have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content. We're glad to have you. Shout out to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Charles, Crazy Pat. Gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, a.k.a. Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Alxi, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. For this month's topic, as determined by the poll on the Patreon page, is cutscenes. How do we handle moments or scenes or events that we really want to showcase in our tabletop RPGs? And when is it okay, if ever, to take control away from the players? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Sean, aka Cert2B.
Hello.
And Marcos.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey, so I don't use a whole lot of cutscenes myself, so I'm probably not going to do a whole lot of... I'll be probably doing more listening than talking for this roundtable, other than the... I think the session 0 is always a good opportunity to use some cutscenes, because you're literally, like, painting the picture for where everybody is and why they're together. But even then, I think a good session 0 can also use, player input. And the reason this entire discussion started is because there's been a really great discussion on the Discord channel involving how to use cutscenes. So how do you all feel about when and how to use cutscene? And I'm using the term cutscene, obviously I'm drawing that from I think video game terminology, where literally it's and I think it's analogous, that the game, you do not control anything until you can put the controller down, you just watch a scene play out. So that's kind of the equivalent of doing that in a tabletop RPG, is basically just the DM just narrating an event or saying that something is just going on without the players really being able to interact.
Yeah, I know that I mainly use cutscenes, like what you were saying, in the session 0 type of setting, in terms of establishing a player's backstory. And it's not necessarily a cutscene per se in that regards. It's more of an interaction Q&A. It's, okay, you're rogue. What would the rogue be doing if they weren't currently in this adventure? How did they get to be so good with the thieves' tools, things like that, and do a little back and forth to kind of help establish a little bit of a history. And I will often also kind of gear those questions towards maybe something that's going to be happening later on in the campaign that I'm planning to have happen, so I can tie part of their backstory into it. The other time that I do use cutscenes, it's not necessarily where I'm involving the players, but it's something that's happening with either an NPC or an enemy that they're facing, almost like a warning, hey, maybe you not be ready for this person just yet, but this is something to kind of keep an eye on and maybe look out for.
Yeah, I like I definitely like the session 0, and I like being able to integrate the players directly into that, which I think I did that. I know Chris did that for Storm King's Thunder, and I think I tried to do... I at least have all the players literally read through their backstories and kind of explain that, and then I will build a cutscene and relationships based on the backstories that they've given me. I don't think I went so far as to roll skill checks or have them roll skill checks or anything for the opening cutscene, but I did use a literal cutscene to establish the villain. And this is something that there's not a good way of doing this in a tabletop RPG, which is involving your villains without literally just having a separate... Unless you have somebody like Strahd who can just kind of pop up everywhere and harass the players and then disappear. Like a lot of villains, and this happens in obviously most stories, are just kind of doing their own villain thing without the actual heroes there. You know, you establish the villains are, you know, terrorizing a town, or they're, you know, bitching at their subordinate, or something's going on where you're establishing them as being all villainy, and the players aren't there at all. So you literally have to just use a cutscene for that. I thought I would have to do more of that for Tomb of Annihilation, but I instead tried to weave together the Sohn sisters kind of throughout the campaign in order to involve the players more directly and have it be like a bunch of dream sequences. And the only time I've actually used a Serac, which I don't think is a spoiler because he's on the freaking cover of Tomb of Annihilation, was the cutscene in the beginning where I had him terrorize characters from our Princes of the Apocalypse campaign. It's always nice to have a villain kind of show off by kind of beating up heroes or characters from a previous story, and then kind of establishing that they are quite powerful and dangerous. But
poor Renwick, man. Poor Renwick. He
I
didn't
know,
deserve
right?
that.
This is a lich on lich battle, man. Stop the lich on lich fights.
Lich on lich violence, man. It's terrible.
Yeah. What do you think, Marcos? What about cutscenes?
Really, I only use cutscenes to put forth some type of exposition. Exposition for a backstory that has become pertinent. Exposition for a story element that needs to be set for the future, or exposition just for the player's sake. Just, you know, so the people behind the PCs are like, oh shit, this is what's going on. This is what's going to happen. You know, something like that. So it gives them insight into something.
Is there? Good.
I've honestly never had to do a cutscene that's taken away the power from the players, though. You know, I honestly like what you did with the Sohn sisters, where you put it in their dreams, where they don't have an option but to watch. You know, the other time, like how Sean said, with how you can do it when for like a backstory element. You know, say something comes up, like the person gets like a nat 20 or something, and it's like, oh, how'd you do this? And the person says, oh, well, you know, I did this back when I was a kid. You know, that might be, you know, calling for some type of cutscene, just to show exposition for some reason. So yeah, really, you know, in another case, you know, say they, you know, the heroes get to the final chamber of the dungeon and they expect to fight the bad guy, but really all they come across is like a silent image spell with like a, you know, delayed some other spell that, you know, provides, you know, the villain talking, you know, mocking them, saying, "Oh, you're late. This is my plan, and you fell for it, but now you're never going to stop me," or something. You know, the characters are sitting there watching it, but they, you know, they can interrupt it if they want to, or they can sit there, listen, and learn.
Yeah.
It really just depends on how their character would react.
I think there's a difference between what we define as a cutscene versus a, like, just a single monologue or something. Because a lot of times when I write something, I'll have like, okay, here's what the character says. And I don't know if that necessarily counts as a cutscene. It's just kind of, you know, like I said, like lengthy exposition or something. But then the players immediately just go into a, you know, normal kind of back and forth. I think by cutscene I was trying to define it as literally you describe an entire situation happening. So like there's like an avalanche happening and you are describing like your players are having to run out of this cave. Like you basically railroad forcibly something happening with the idea that your players are not supposed to intercede, which is a dangerous thing to do, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, so like, so say in that avalanche situation, would you allow for them to do rolls, or would it just be like a tense situation that you describe until the end of it happens, or would it be okay? You make a roll, and what you roll can change the outcome of this cutscene.
I think ideally I would want to involve the players at least with a single saving throw or check that they can use to maybe like mitigate some damage or do something that wouldn't necessarily change the outcome but might either give them advantage or at least less damage that they take or something just to make them more involved. But if the idea is I need for this certain thing to happen, like if an avalanche happens, I need them to end up in this other area, then I would kind of paint that as a cutscene where they wouldn't have a lot of chance. And the tricky thing is a lot of players are going to be speaking up and saying, oh wait, well I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that. And then that gets really tricky as a DM. Like, how do you allow some of this to happen, but knowing that if you really, really needed to end up in this certain path?
Yeah, and I know some players are really, really against railroading, and some don't mind it as much. So I think it does vary a little bit from group to group. I think one of the, and I'll give you an example of a situation where I've actually used exactly what both of you are kind of describing here. I had done a little conversion, like a Legend of Zelda style game that I turned into a D&D game. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long because, quite frankly, it wasn't very good because when I first started out. But essentially, I had the backstory was that Ganon was banished to the D&D world, and he was a summoner there, or some sort of magic user, and he had basically kind of kidnapped these individuals. Were using them as sacrifice to open up this portal that would basically bring them back to Hyrule. And it was essentially the very beginning of the campaign, but I wanted them to interact. The end result was no matter what they did, they were going to end up through this portal in Hyrule, but it would just be a matter of, this portal was open, they're being sucked through, they have to do strength checks or saves or whatnot, but the end result would be that they would get sucked through the portal no matter what. And like I said, I was just starting GMing at the time, so I probably could have handled it a little bit better, but it's that situation where I want to get the players to where the actual campaign is, but I want them to interacting with it as well. And how do you handle that? Honestly, I don't know what the proper answer is. It does vary from group to group, and it does depend on what your players want. And that's a good session 0 type of thing. What are you looking for with this? What's your idea of an ideal game? That kind of thing. But for sure, session 0 stuff is a whole different topic altogether.
Yeah, and that's always the caveat with any of these discussions is, like, obviously know your group, know what everybody wants, know what everybody's comfortable with in terms of everything from content to the way mechanics are going to work, whether you want to go combat heavy or combat light, go story heavy. Yeah, obviously all of that matters a lot. And that matters with cutscenes too. If you have a very story-heavy group, there's shows that I've watched that they might go entire multiple sessions without ever even rolling a dice or something. It's a lot of story. Then those aren't so much cutscenes, but you could paint cutscenes a lot easier with that kind of group versus one that is going to want to constantly do things and be more proactive about, exploring and asking questions and fighting everything and stealing everything and doing all that. Those probably would balk at trying to set forth a cutscene in which they've been have control taken away from them.
Yeah, I guess you have to look at the verisimilitude of the type of cutscenes. There's the cutscene that's literally almost a movie, but then there's the cutscene that has QuickTime events, and you have to think about what is the purpose that you're trying to get across. If you have a cutscene with QuickTime events, quote unquote, there's a possibility to fail, and if you're putting a possibility to fail, then why make a cutscene in the first place? Just guide your characters in that path to begin with. To me, a cutscene is something that they have no control over, something that they are watching to learn something.
Yeah.
There's no chance for failure. There's no chance for succeeding. This is just what happens. Like the epic final fight. The epic final fight. You're jumping from rock to rock, trying to get across the bridge that's crumbling underneath you. Do you want to have the option to look behind you and see the druid not press X in time and he falls to his death, or would you just have the option for that fighter to reach out, grab the druid, at the last second, left hand holding onto the edge, right hand holding onto the druid, to pull himself up and keep on going. If you give them the option to fail, they might. And is that what you want for your scene?
Right, yeah, so it's a really good point. You could turn it into a QuickTime event, which obviously D&D is built for, very much so. With you could paint a scene and then just tell players, here's what's happening. You're crossing a bridge, it starts to crumble, I need you all to roll whatever. Then you've essentially created like a scene with a QuickTime event in it, and everybody has to make that choice. If you don't want anybody plummeting their death, then would you still let them roll, or do you just say, here's what happens, you all manage to... See, I probably wouldn't do that, though, because you really need to give them some kind of choice. I think what I'm getting at for a cutscene is, if you need to, and this is what kicked off the discussion on the Discord page for capturing players, which is might be a whole nother topic, but let's dive into it with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Would you cutscene if you really needed to drastically change the flow of the adventure, which I think capturing players is a good example of that? Could you paint that as a cutscene and not have your players just rebel about being involved?
No, you can't do that without giving them a chance.
Okay.
Because that's when the passive aggressiveness sets in. They throw their hands up, lean back in the chair.
Yeah.
And everybody, it's just that tension because the guy's like, well, there's no point. Well, do you want to say anything? No, because it doesn't matter. Well, do you want to do this? No, because it doesn't matter. You took away my character.
This sounds like you've had a personal experience with this.
I mean, I'm just saying, when the person throws up their hands, leans back in the chair, and puts the head in their hand and just stares at you, it's like, oh, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
So, unless it's something like pretty much if there's a chance for failure, I don't do a cutscene. Like if I wanted to abduct a player now, I first I give them chances to spot whatever is going on, because there's a reason why there's passive perception, and then I'd say, okay, suddenly this happens. Roll a Constitution check. You fail, cutscene. You pass, this next thing happens. We roll initiative. This happens. Roll another check. Oh, you fail. You can do one thing. You can scream, shout, this, whatever, before you fall unconscious, and then the cutscene happens. I give them progressive chances depending on the amount of failure, I suppose, on whatever check they needed to make. And then once it's been settled, then either the cutscene that I have planned happens, or the person I have unfortunately gets chopped into 1,000 pieces and thrown out the balcony.
Rough.
Yeah, that's a very good point and a very good way of putting it. If you are giving them roles, if you are giving them chances to succeed or fail, you can't really call that a cutscene.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're taking our mindset of like a video game cutscene, which video games and tabletops are, quite frankly, two different forms of medium.
Yeah.
I guess one example where I've actually used a cutscene recently in the game that I am running, it's actually a conversion I did of a Pathfinder game of Curse of the Crimson Throne, and the Queen is definitely the main villain of the campaign, and taking a few cues from Game of Thrones, quite frankly, where she's basically Cersei, but with a bit more magical power.
I hate her already.
That sounds terrifying.
It's kind of referencing, it's kind of referencing what I had mentioned before of saying, yes, this person is definitely the enemy, but you're not quite ready yet. And I had, quite frankly, killed off an NPC character that they would sometimes move around with because they have leveled up enough where they don't necessarily need the NPC help anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, the Queen is using her connection. Spoiler alert if any of my players were listening to this. Her connection to this ancient dragon, and basically through this connection did this plume of fire that just melted several folks. And they're like, because basically this Queen NPC character was starting to go a little mad queen.
And you did this in a cutscene? You describe it, or did you do it like in combat?
No, it wasn't a combat with them. It was a situation where there were a couple prisoners that were being lined up that were being accused of something that the Queen was just doing this public display, and the NPC came out and basically attacked the Queen because the Queen was starting to show her true colors, and the Queen's like, no, we're not having this. And the players were actually there to kind of see what was going on, so they were like spectators in the crowd. And then whenever she did this big plume of fire and melted this poor schmuck, and they're like, oh crap.
So when you do that, do you Do you actually like roll damage and cast a spell, or do you just describe this as happening as like just this is magic DM like this?
I was describing what was happening, although I could have rolled damage with because this is basically like a statted type of situation. So I could have rolled damage and shown them the amount of damage that she's capable of doing, considering she's basically like end of campaign boss type of individual. But I didn't want to reveal that much in that regard, so this was more of a descriptive type of situation. So this was one I was treating very much like a cutscene.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example of it. So you wanted to just, and that's good because the players aren't necessarily actively. Were they like there next to the person, or is this something they just saw from
They were
afar?
in the crowd. There was like a big crowd of several hundred people, maybe even a couple thousand people that were there, and they were a little late coming to there because of events that happened previous to this. So they were kind of in the back of the crowd.
Oh, okay. So it would have been hard for him to say, well, my character would have jumped and saved the day.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Oh, you got a couple thousand heads to step on before you can do that.
How did the PCs react? Did they try to like in some way stop this from happening and say, like, "Well, back up, I want to do this"?
Yeah, once the fire plume happened, the crowd started really panicking and started dispersing. And since they're kind of in the back of the crowd, they're being pushed back. And the group was actually a little split because one of the other NPCs that they were friends with was in a bad situation. So part of the group was helping them. Part of them were just seeing what was going on. So they didn't have the full party with them there, too.
Okay.
So not only were they realized that they were in a situation that, okay, this is maybe a little beyond us, but we don't have our full group here right now. This is something we need to regroup and discuss what we're going to do.
Okay.
Which was what I was hoping would happen, and thankfully is what happened.
I
What they should have done was gone to their NPC friends and say, take off those red shirts, please. Please take them off.
I think that's,
how'd this get on me?
that's probably the best use of cutscenes in the tabletop RPG is to do things that surround the villain and show off their prowess and power when you don't want the players to actually be involved in like a direct fight of any way. I'm trying to think of any times I've actually done that, but I don't know. Have there been any?
Your players are level 6, 7, 8, and the enemy is a CR 20. You don't want them fighting that. They're not going to win.
Right. Let's go back to the capturing scenario one, because this one might come up in our campaign at some point. So you don't want to cutscene that, but could you set up? Is there any way you could set up an event where, like, the player, you could still make them all roll something? For example, let's say that you want them to get captured because they are going to be knocked unconscious because of something they ate. So you could say, have them just all of a sudden roll a Constitution saving throw, and they don't know why, and then have this scene unfold, and hopefully enough of them have failed that they fall unconscious as all these enemies approach, and then the idea is they would be captured from there. And maybe the ones that aren't captured could then have a chance to slip away or something. That would...
Yeah, you could definitely do that.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things that you have to see how your PCs are behaving. Like, if you have paranoid, frightened PCs who are wearing rings of mind shielding and brooches of mind evasion, it's going to be a little difficult to try to sneak something. Say somebody's been stalking them, then that person sneaks in the middle of the night, poisons them, and takes them away, or somebody slips some sleep agent into their dream, because that they're role playing their character as being paranoid and hypervigilant to the to the detriment of something else. But if you have PCs that are just like, I do this because I want to, or I do this because, this is what my character would do, you can easily spin that to say, hey, you've been being watched this entire time, and maybe you've never noticed. You can give them a chance, maybe because, they are adventurers. They have, some type of third eye in their brain that's like danger sense. But you can give them a chance to like, hey, roll me a perception check. As you split from your party because the guy called you a nerd and you didn't like that, so you walk away and down the road. Roll a perception check. Oh, you didn't fail. Suddenly you feel a blade at the back of your neck, pricking you, saying, "Come with me or die." Yeah, that was because they walked away. It's not like they were standing with their friends and then that happens. They put themselves in a situation, and you can benefit from that situation.
Do you ever use cutscenes for as like cappers for the beginning or end of a session?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Give me some examples.
Well, kind of like I was saying earlier, just for exposition stuff. At the end of the session, we fade to black as you hear, demonic chanting in the background. A red light flickers in the center, and then the light spreads to show a room full of cultists. Standing around an altar, with the pentagram written in somebody's blood. The unfortunate man is, tied to the, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that way they can say, it's not just like the villain disappears and you don't know what he's doing. The players know that, yeah, the villain's out there doing stuff. And it's impossible to not have meta knowledge in games, but I have found that when you do those cutscenes, suddenly your PCs are more focused.
Yeah.
Instead of wanting to go, hey, there's a dog, let's go chase the dog down the sewer and go to magical Dragonland. You're like, no, we need to go to this keep and knock down this door. Their characters don't know the reason why, but they as players know that this guy is kidnapping people and torturing them for his god, and that drives them to keep them on pace.
Fish on a hook, dangle it in front of the players, and they'll take it.
Yeah. I suppose one example that I could give that I had used in a previous campaign, they were going into this one mansion, very similar type of situation to what you were describing, where there was individuals that were going missing in town, and so they were investigating it, tracked it down to this one old mansion that no one's lived in for a while, and then they open up this last room, and this is like might as well say boss room right on the front door, And they open up the door, and I'm describing the scene. There's these pillars with these arcane symbols, and there's this energy that's flowing around. There's a couple these demonic bird-like creatures that seem to be guarding around. This energy is flowing into this magic circle in the center of the room, and there is a female figure that is seemingly imprisoned there, holding this staff for some reason, as if trying to hold this energy back. And as you open up the door and you examine in the situation from behind you, and this is one of those rare circumstances where I will actually kind of quote unquote take control of a character. Character X says, fade to black.
Okay. That's an end of a session kind of a teaser?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, that way they don't have a say as oh wait, but now I do this. Oh well, no, because it's in the session. We'll pick it up next week.
You to say that next time.
Now would they then at the beginning of next session try and say like, okay, wait?
Possibly, but once we're at the beginning of the next session, then we're RPing away. So have at it.
That's true. Has there been any? I mentioned this before about how do you establish villains? And I guess Sean, you had a good point with the they were in a crowd and at least saw that villain. But I feel like the way I would use cutscenes, and I thought I would have to do this more, and I didn't really have to do it since session 0, but that's because I've been using the Sohn sisters more as active villains. But in terms of using the big bad, when the big bad wouldn't deign themselves to like sit there and harass the players or even be anywhere near the players as the players are trying to do other things. Like you can put up mini bosses in their way and all these little subplots, but in terms of actually fleshing out and making a villain more personable and memorable, how do you do that without just taking a cutscene that literally doesn't involve the players at all. So like you are taking the camera lens and putting it in a completely different and maybe not necessarily the villain, maybe you want to show something else, but would you ever literally describe a scene, a decently lengthy scene that didn't involve the players at all in order to like further a story or better establish a character or something? Like maybe it's somebody the PC knows or fights or something.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, the scene that I described not too long ago. You know, the cultists all with their hands in the air, swaying back and forth, chanting demonically. You know, guy in this tied to an altar screaming while he gets his organs cut out. You know, being offered up to some.
I didn't realize that was a separate like.
God.
Okay, so that's like a separate area that you really
yeah. It's like it's completely in a different area. The PCs are sitting at home drinking wine, playing Mazes of Monsters. And that scene fades, but the player like the players cut to a scene somewhere else where the bad guy is doing bad things.
Yeah. So
the players are like, "Oh, this bad stuff is happening. We need to stop that," and it reflects in the player characters by being more focused.
Okay.
But yeah, I do those story scenes all the time.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about the metagaming, because you are technically giving that information to the players, but not to the characters.
Yeah, but the players always imprint some of themselves onto the player characters.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow it always happens. You know, it's easy to see when you look for it, and it's impossible to take out meta knowledge on all meta knowledge, unfortunately. But you can use it for good. You know, that meta knowledge of bad things are happening. My character, would want to stop this. He's already seen bits and pieces of it. And that can be the driving factor for the character in game to continue going forward, while the player is like, "Oh God, that's terrible,"
I suppose something that I've done in that regards that I'm actually doing in my current campaign, because one of my players is a divination wizard, and his whole backstory is he's been looking for his sister who's been missing for a while. And he found a necklace that his sister had left behind. And the whole story that we've kind of established with his sister, she's also a divination wizard, but she also kind of gets these like visions of the future or of the past. And essentially it was a necklace that was tied to his sister. And since it was tied to his sister, he was able to use it as well. And the functionality that I've put into it is that he gets to give up one of his divination portents, and in exchange for that, he gets to utilize the necklace to potentially gain some information. And I essentially will do a private D100 roll, or sometimes I'll have him do it. And if it's like a 1 through 25, it's a vision of a past event. If it's a 26 through 50, it's a vision of a present event, but at a different location. And I think the next third is, or the next quarter is a future event that's kind of set in stone, meaning something I'm going to have happen as the GM, and something that could happen depending on what the players do and what the roles are. And so that is a way that I'm able to give the players some potentially vague information, because it is a vision, so it could be open to interpretation. But it gives them a chance to learn something about what's going on, or perhaps where they might need to go.
I like that a lot. That's a cool idea.
And actually, you did that too, a little bit too. And when they were in the Orlonga dungeon with the 2 sarcophagi, how when they entered the room, they saw the flashback, like hologram vision. That was actually a pretty good use of a cutscene as well. There wasn't any chance for them to roll or anything. It was just something that they saw to teach them something, to give them exposition, and then they took that information and went with it from there.
That reminded me of like a horror video game, like a BioShock or something, where you walk into the room and you see like the ghostly images like performing the things in the past, and then based on what you just saw, you can infer what's going to happen in the present.
Prior to starting the stream, we had talked a little bit about the Pathfinder Kingmaker video game that Alcat Games had released. There is actually an area that you go to in that game where they actually do that very type of thing, where essentially like the chapter 1 villain, who is called the Stag Lord in the game, you actually go to you find the hut that he was basically raised in by his father, who was a very not a nice guy. And you actually get to see via like shadowy images of the interaction that he had with his father in the past, and a little bit later in life, and a little bit later in life at that same location, but in different areas on that particular map.
Okay.
So it basically is telling you how he went from being a druidic child to the bastard that he is now.
It's basically a more interactive version of the like audio journal thing that a lot of modern video games have been doing, which is they seed an area with like, I'm playing the second Tomb Raider game right now, and it's almost ridiculous how you find like these recordings from all the villains and different groups. They're just leaving these like helpful recorders behind with all their exposition and thoughts and feelings. Like, there's no way in hell any of these characters would be leaving these things behind, other than the game just wants me to learn more background information.
And besides, those recorders are freaking expensive. You wouldn't buy a freaking recorder and just drop it on the ground.
There's like dozens of them everywhere.
15 of them. You'd have like a single thing on your phone.
Yeah, they're like just mini phones laying around.
It's stupid.
It's really goofy, but yeah. And I did that with also in Orlanga with the journal thing. I left some journals laying behind that could do some information. I don't think those are.
That's different. But that's different though.
Yeah, that's not really a cutscene.
Yeah, no, I mean, but also that's like a good use of, because I mean, since it's a role-playing game, you can tailor it exactly to how you need to not seem cheesy.
Yeah,
it's easy to be like, he had a journal, and he was like, people wrote journals back then.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe he had to write a journal to be able to report more, reflective of what he's doing to Ross and C. So, it definitely makes sense that he might have dropped that journal and the pages scattered, and they can find those. That makes more sense than finding a $25 tape recorder, and then another $25 tape recorder, then another $25 tape recorder.
Anonymous henchman, did you lose another recorder? That's coming out of your budget.
Jeez.
So many recorders. Standard issue recorders.
It's terrible.
Fine, I'll give you another one.
Oh, thanks, boss.
Put all your thoughts and feelings into here. Leave it somewhere the hero will find. Yeah,
all bad guys must record more.
That's for sure. I think cutscenes can be used sparingly but effectively, and primarily if they're not used to force the players into doing things, because I think at that point, at some point, if you do that too much, you stop playing D&D and it's just somebody telling you a story.
Yeah, and then they get angry.
Yeah, justifiably, I think, for a lot of reasons, but...
Yeah, a video game I remember from a long time ago, the very first Xenosaga game, reminded me a lot of that. You spend more time watching the cutscenes than you do actually playing the game. Now, granted, it was a really good story, but still, you're spending more time watching the game than you are actually playing it.
Yeah, a lot of JRPGs especially seem to have that criticism.
There was a Metal Gear Solid game like that, too, where it says, like, I'm tired of watching this movie. Can I play the game, please?
Yeah. I realize I haven't touched the controller in a while. Which can be fun, but it's also like, look, can you guys just make like an animated movie and I'll just sit and like watch that?
Exactly. It gets to
that
point.
And it's almost like the Netflix thing popping up, like, are you still watching this movie? I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta push a button.
Cutscene's coming. Let's go get some coffee.
Yeah, no, I like having the interaction for sure. There's just, and the tricky thing about any kind of tabletop RPG is, as a DM, you want to try to make the most enjoyable, interesting story possible, and you hope that the players are gonna follow those hoops, but also are gonna create, essentially, maybe not entirely, sometimes entirely new story, but at least maybe a slightly different story through the actions that they make, and you have to be able to prepare for that. And I think cutscenes help in some way be able to paint certain pictures like you need them to happen. Like, it was when they first arrived in the Oralunga chamber, there was a decently long cutscene where the what's his name, Rosnisi, was talking to whoever the leader of the Oralunga troop was, and there was a kind of a little bit of a back and forth between those two. And technically, at any time, one of my players could have done something, and I probably would have paused it and let them do the thing. and they just would have gotten less information out of that. But instead, I think everybody just kind of sat back and watched this scene unfold, and then eventually I had, the villains realize the players were standing there in the doorway and then engage them. So I think there's a way you can at least open up a scene or a room, and obviously we all do this in terms of telling them the description and things, but you could even have like a full-on thing happening, whether the players are spying on it or they stumble upon it. You can have a little bit of a back and forth scene, and then it's interesting whether the players want to actually interrupt it or just kind of sit back and see what's happening. And that's something that video games do a lot of times as well, is they'll give you the option of, do you speak up, or do you just sit there and let these things or let these characters continue like arguing or discussing or whatever it is happening.
Renegade every time.
yeah, exactly. Do you have the little pop-up that appears like, do you throw a punch at somebody, or how do you get involved? I forgot Mass Effect. That's funny.
Good time.
Yeah, that was an interesting way Mass Effect did that, of what would normally be like just dialogue cutscenes. Like occasionally you can just do the little Paragon or Renegade things.
Yep, and it makes a big difference in how your story plays out.
That's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Renegade every time after I saved Rex, then it was Renegade every time. But I had to save Rex.
You gotta save Rex, man. You can't let Rex go. Yeah. That's terrible. I don't think I ever actually did a Renegade playthrough. I did a neutral playthrough where just kind of roll. Which the bad thing is, to go off on a Mass Effect tangent, that game never really supported going actually role playing. It was either you were rewarded for either being a total goody two shoes or a total asshole, but you weren't really rewarded for just kind of going down the middle and just treating each base case by case basis, So it was almost not role playing. It was just I am either the good guy or the anti-hero.
Yeah, you can't be lawful neutral in Mass Effect.
Yeah, I tried that on my first playthrough, and you don't actually get any kind of mechanical benefit for that versus the other ones. So it's all right, well.
Yep. You don't get the girl. You don't save Rex.
Well, you can still save Rex, but you don't get some of the bonuses at the end.
No, actually, no. You had to go full blown Paragon, lawful good, in order to save Rex.
Did you? I don't think I did.
Yeah,
full blown.
You had to do it every single time it came up. You had to do.
Oh, with that one event, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, to do it. Otherwise, when it got to the Rex, you weren't able to convince him and actually shot him in the face. And then he actually dies later. So it all comes around.
I miss Mass Effect. That's a good series. I think we are nearing the end of our cutscene discussion. Is there any last thoughts we have on using cutscenes as we've defined them here in our tabletop RPG? Sean, go first.
I don't have anything else that we need to add. I think we've kind of covered all the bases.
Marcos, do you have anything to add?
No, I would actually agree. Yeah, I would actually pretty much agree. If it's a cutscene, it's something that they don't have much control over, and what control they do have shouldn't alter the end of the outcome of the cutscene.
So cutscene. So whatever our thesis is at the end should be that cutscenes that involve the player should always give them at least some way to change or interact with events. Otherwise, cutscenes can be used very well to showcase events that the players are not involved in at all, or that they are, or it's something that you want to set up for a following scene. Like Sean, you mentioned the big bad killing one of their NPCs, but it was in an area where they couldn't really necessarily save them in that moment, but of course they can still interact with the fallout of that. I think those are good uses of cutscenes. Cool. All right, thank you to Sean and Marcos for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable discussion. I am Eric Watson. I hope to see you all again for next month's discussion.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Well done.
Yes, I did it right. Finally.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Hey, you have a good day, my man. Catch you next time.
All right.